Welcome to Intelligent Investor Insights with Joshua Barone, your host and guide through the noise of today's markets. Here we interpret the data behind the headlines, break down what's driving the economy and interest rates, and help serious investors make decisions rooted in clarity, not emotion. If you're looking for disciplined, research-driven insight to strengthen your portfolio, you're in the right place.
Welcome back to Intelligent Investor Insights. Today the big question is pretty simple. Even if the answer isn't, what happens when your main theater is the Indo-Pacific, but your carrier muscle gets pulled toward the Iran fight? That's the dilemma. A carrier isn't just a floating airport. It's a visible balance sheet entry for national power, with aircraft, escorts, logistics, and political signaling bundled into one asset. Where it sits tells allies, adversaries, insurers, traders, and every military planner with a screen exactly what Washington seems to care about most right now. And when that asset moves, the strategic message moves with it. And location matters more than people think. A carrier near a flashpoint is not just about launching aircraft. It signals commitment, shortens response times, complicates an opponent's planning, and reassures friends who'd prefer not to find out they're alone on a Tuesday morning. Pull that carrier away, even temporarily, and the message changes. Maybe not intentionally, but markets and militaries don't wait for clarification memos. That's the key frame for this whole episode. U.S. naval posture is being read in real time. Allies are asking, are we covered? Adversaries are asking, is there daylight? And investors ought to be asking a less dramatic but very practical question. Where does visible force concentration create or reduce risk in shipping, energy, and defense spending? Strategy, like credit, eventually shows up in the price. Now to the Western Pacific. Reportedly, U.S. carrier presence there has thinned, while China has stepped up activity around Taiwan, including more visible exercises and a stronger surface posture. That combination matters. Even if the absence is temporary, Beijing doesn't have to believe the U.S. has abandoned the region. It just has to see a narrower window, or think it sees one. In deterrence terms, perception is usually enough to change behavior. The reporting points to a dual carrier presence on China's side, and PLA exercises that look a lot like a pressure test. That doesn't automatically mean imminent conflict. Let's be adults here. Exercises can be signaling, rehearsal, coercion, or all three at once. But when one side's visible naval footprint eases off and the other side increases tempo near Taiwan, the strategic read gets pretty straightforward. This is why temporary gaps can be dangerous. Deterrence isn't only about ultimate capability. The US still has enormous capability. It's also about near-term availability and perceived willingness. If Beijing concludes the Pacific bench is thinner for the moment, it may push harder below the threshold of war. More air sorties, more naval demonstrations, more pressure designed to normalize the abnormal. Kind of like testing whether the guard dog is asleep or just blinking. And none of this is happening in the dark. The reporting says China is using satellite surveillance and open source tracking to monitor US naval movements. That should surprise exactly nobody. In modern maritime competition, visible deployment patterns have intelligence value all by themselves. If a carrier group moves, a lot of people can see it, infer intent, and update plans before lunch. There are claims in the reporting about imagery, intelligence flow, and how quickly that information can feed decision making. I want to be careful here. We should distinguish between what's been reported and what we can firmly verify. But the broad strategic point is solid. Surveillance, navigation systems, and persistent data collection shrink the old luxury of ambiguity. Big naval assets are powerful, but they're also legible. That changes deterrence. It's no longer just, do you have the force? It's, can your force move, disperse, concentrate, and stay unpredictable enough to complicate the other guy's math? If your patterns are visible, your posture becomes a live signal. And when both sides can watch each other almost continuously, maritime competition starts looking less like hide and seek and more like speed chess with satellites. Taiwan remains the center of gravity here. The reporting describes PLA rehearsal timelines that include blockade and amphibious scenarios. Again, rehearsal is not the same thing as execution, but if you're a US planner, you don't get paid to assume those are theatrical props. You plan for capability, timing, and intent under uncertainty. That's the job. The 2027 benchmark keeps coming up because it's treated as a readiness target, not a prophecy, not a guaranteed invasion date, but a planning marker tied to force development, logistics, and command readiness. That distinction matters. Investors love false precision, and militaries hate it. A readiness benchmark means the window of concern is not some vague future decade. It's close enough to shape procurement, basing, exercises, alliance coordination, and industrial capacity right now. And Taiwan matters because it sits at the intersection of military geography, alliance credibility, and global economics. If coercion there succeeds, the shockwave is bigger than one island. It hits regional confidence, sea lane assumptions, and the credibility of US security commitments across Asia. In plain English, if Taiwan becomes easier to pressure, the entire Pacific gets more expensive to ensure, defend, and invest in. Now, there are signs the Iran conflict may be winding down, at least relative to the hotter phase, which could free up carrier assets. That would matter operationally and symbolically. A carrier returning to the Pacific would tell markets and militaries that the United States is reweighting back toward its primary theater. But de-escalation is not peace, and the Strait of Hormuz doesn't stop mattering because headlines cool off. It remains a shipping choke point with obvious energy implications. Even if the direct fighting eases, the residual risk to tankers, transit, and insurance pricing can linger. That's how these things work. Stress leaves the room slowly, then all at once, then maybe comes back because somebody with a missile and poor judgment wants attention. For investors, the takeaway is simple. Oil shock risk doesn't need a full-scale regional war to reprice markets. It just needs enough uncertainty around transit and supply expectations. So yes, a calmer Iran file may release naval capacity, but no, it does not mean the Middle East drops off the board. It just means Washington is still playing two tables at once, and neither table is cheap. That brings us to allies. Japan has reportedly been alarmed by munitions shortfalls and delayed deliveries. And that's not a side note. You cannot do deterrence on PowerPoint. If stocks of key munitions are thin, if replenishment timelines stretch, and if allied planners can't count on sustained supply, every war plan starts to look a little too optimistic. Real deterrence lives in inventory, readiness, and logistics, not slogans. So allies are adapting. AUKUS is part of that. The so-called strategic lattice idea is part of that too. This broader push toward distributed deterrence rather than assuming a US carrier is always parked where everyone wants it. That means more networked capabilities, more burden sharing, more resilience across bases, platforms, and logistics, less one giant hammer, more a toolbox spread across the shop. And honestly, that adaptation makes sense. If US carrier presence is less certain at any given moment because global demands are stacked, allies have to build plans that are sturdier than wishful thinking. The mature interpretation here is not panic, it's adjustment. Strong alliances evolve when the environment changes. Weak ones just keep rereading old assumptions until reality sends them a bill. So what should we watch next? The most important near-term signal is which carrier gets redeployed back toward the Pacific and how quickly, along with whether that movement is paired with air wings, escorts, and logistics support. I'm not going to pretend certainty where we don't have it, but the next return movement would be read as a priority statement, not a press release, a priority statement. If a carrier swings back west, the message is that Taiwan deterrence and Indo-Pacific presence are being reasserted visibly. That matters strategically and it matters financially. Pacific redeployment could calm some concerns around regional deterrence while shifting attention back to shipping exposure, defense readiness, munitions capacity, and the companies tied to naval and allied force structure. Meanwhile, if Hormuz risk remains sticky, energy and shipping markets may still carry a geopolitical premium. Two risks can coexist. Markets are generous that way. The broader lesson is the one I always come back to. Force posture is strategy made visible. Where assets go tells you what policymakers fear, what they value, and what they may be underestimating. Watch the map, not just the speeches. The map usually tells the truth faster. That's it for today. We'll keep following the redeployments, the alliance response, and what it means for investors trying to separate signal from noise. See you next time.
Thanks for joining Joshua on Intelligent Investor Insights. If today's discussion raised questions about your portfolio strategy, risk exposure, or how to navigate this late cycle environment, we invite you to connect with us. We work directly with investors who want data-driven guidance, institutional level analysis, and a partner in building durable wealth. Reach out to start the conversation and take the next step toward becoming a more informed, confident, and resilient investor. Until next time, stay rational, stay disciplined, and invest with intelligence.